Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your guest, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. And today we have a very special show and very important because this past year with COVID, 93,000 Americans died, up from 70,000 that died the previous year and the year previous to that. Really much too high. And so I want to ask a question to you. How many Latin American parents want their kids on drugs? How many African American parents want their kids on drugs? How many Chinese American parents want their kids on drugs? Let's change it to a different question. How many American parents of the Jewish religion want their kids on drugs? How about those parents who are American of the Christian religion want their kids on drugs? And obviously the answer is none, zero. To make tremendous amount of gain in the stock market and lose your child, there's no doubt what you would give me as an answer. You would take your child's future and throw away the money. So today we have a very important show, and I want to start by introducing our special guest, Mr. Robert Wiggins. And our show is going to be dedicated to drug prevention, drug rehabilitation. And Buddha, if you can put him up on the screen, please. Our special guest, Mr. Bobby Wiggins, is a renowned drug rehab expert, having overcome his own lifelong addiction through the Narconon program in 1977. For nearly 40 years, he has helped thousands of people recover from their addictions. He's reached over 900,000 school children with live drug education presentations on 5 continents and 13 million school children in more than 11,000 schools throughout America. Mr. Wiggins is featured in videos Ecstasy, The Real Story 2006, and Drugs and Emotions, both of which were awarded the prestigious Aurora Award. He is featured in the 10 Things Your Friends May Not Know About Drugs series, showing on YouTube.com with over 20 million visits. Mr. Wiggins has presented to the NFL alumni. He's trained NFL players to deliver drug education. And he spoke at the Britain House of Lords by special invitation to educate members of Parliament on substance abuse. He's delivered his drug education program to 5 top universities in India. He's trained agents for the Drug Enforcement Agency of the Philippines. He's worked with the Federal Aviation Administration to educate pilots. He's created a drug education curriculum for high school students, which was studied scientifically and published in a major medical journal. The United States Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration approve of the Narconon education program, which Mr. Wiggins utilizes in his activities. Currently, Mr. Wiggins is working with youth detention centers and other youth groups throughout the state of Florida. And really, I could go on and on and on. The list doesn't end. He's a prolific humanitarian, saving our kids and many individuals from drugs. And it's our pleasure at A Time for Truth and Buddha, if we can put him up on the screen, I want to welcome Mr. Robert Wiggins to our show.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's good to be here.
It's a total pleasure to have you. And there's so much we're going to cover. I don't know, we're probably going to have more than one show, but let's get started. What I wanted to ask you, why do you feel so many youth in our country are taking drugs?
Well, the answer to that is simple. There's something I do in my presentations every single time, which is like what we call stripping off the false information before I give the message. And it's very, very vital because most of that false information that our youth are getting comes from the media, from television, from all over the place. People ask me, about marijuana, et cetera, and I go, I know a lot about marijuana. A drug rehabilitation counselor for 40 years, but the most destructive thing about it is they need to stop talking about it. It literally, because there's controversy around it, it literally gets advertised to our youth. It just constant bombardment, of it's unbelievable amounts of false information on that particular drug. But overall, just drugs in general, the amount of media, the amount of advertising, et cetera, et cetera. I did a study one time. I was trying to find the positive, okay, when did the drug statistics go down? They went down in the 80s. By 1989, marijuana was not used that much. I tell kids that now, and they're like, what are you talking about? All substance abuse or all substance use in that decade went down. So I started investigating it. The number of movies that portrayed marijuana and other drugs in a positive light in the 1980s was 14. In 2015, there were 48 movies that actually showed it in a positive light. And, artists create the future. So what you've got is a message, a thread that goes through what our kids are actually, receiving. And, as parents, I think it's really important to give the kids the basic information at a very early age and to just let them know that they're going to be bombarded with positive drug, promotions, and they're going to be bombarded with it all through their teens. So it's helpful to just set them up, warn them, give them some basic facts on what the drugs really do, and arm them for the future.
Absolutely. I had one of my own friends back in high school, this is back in 1970s, and when the marijuana level was THC of 1. And he smoked marijuana. He was a great athlete. He actually got a scholarship to play, I won't say exactly what sport to keep it anonymous, but to play a sport at Ohio State University. And he probably could have made pro, but he got kicked out in the first semester. Things were different back then. And they told him to stay off. If he went to junior college, he could go back in. But at the junior college, he continued and got kicked out and never really made it. But the point that I want to make is that this was a THC level of 1, and he couldn't get off of it back then. And, I want to ask you, Bobby, because I know the amounts I heard are much higher. What are the THC levels of marijuana today in 2021?
Well, they're astronomical, Ben. I mean, it varies, but even the medical marijuana is going up to 50. I saw one on the other day, 15.8%, 21%. Some of the what they do and have been doing since the 70s is called hybridization. where they take one plant, one type of marijuana that's very powerful, and they meld it with the other one. It's a very common thing in terms of, like, putting one plant with another plant and coming out with something else. And the goal since the 70s has been to create a higher THC content. Right. Well, what is THC? Tetrahydrocannabinol. It's just basically a poison, is what it is. And it doesn't matter what the drug is, a small amount of it will stimulate. It wakes you up. More of that same drug will begin to depress. It slows you down. It can put you to sleep. And like any drug, enough of that drug fast enough kills the person, because it's toxic. It has a toxicity level, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're going up these levels on marijuana, you're playing with fire. I think the biggest lie, and I want to introduce this right now, and it is a lie, that marijuana is not addictive. As a rehab counselor and working for our international offices, from the 80s to the 90s to the early 2000s, I had one person that I got off marijuana because they were addicted to it. In 2011, I called around all our centers. How many guys do you have in rehab that are addicted to marijuana, just marijuana? And a couple of the centers, the larger ones, said, oh, it's 30%. 30% of our population. So I want to dispel that lie right out of the gate. That is not what's happening in the real world, no matter what the quote-unquote experts say. Marijuana, especially with the THC content where it's at right now, is extremely addictive.
Absolutely. I can see that just from the story of my own friend at such a lower level where he never really could get off. And I've seen that with other people around me who used marijuana and the difficulties they have. They kind of look at it like it's no big deal. And but I've seen, and I was going to ask you if you have any information on this, I've seen how our National Institute of Health has been studying the effects of these high marijuana levels on pregnant mothers and their newborn infants, and what has been found on that, with the marijuana and that aspect?
I don't, I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't have a lot of information along those lines, but I can't imagine. I mean, one of the things we know is that tetrahydrocannabinol lodges in the fatty tissue of the body. Right. We know that. Absolutely, for sure, because at Narconon, for decades, we've been flushing drugs out. I had a personal experience with that. I did a program, it's the sauna detox program at Narconon, and prior to that, we had another program where you had to go out and you had to run 6 to 8 miles a day, take vitamins, minerals, and I called it nuts and berries, like Yogi and Boo Boo in the old cartoons, because you had to eat a very strict diet, vegetables and fruits and things that flush things out of your body. And I was on that particular program for 14 months. And at the end of 14 months, I was like, wow, I feel great. I was running 6 miles a day, felt fantastic. And so I tested the completion of that program. A year later, the executive director calls me in our office and she says, Bobby, have a seat. I said, sure, Patty. She goes, listen, we have a new program. I'm like, yeah, what is it? She starts laughing. She says, well, it's actually designed to flush the old drugs out of your body. And I was like, wait a minute. I already did that. She goes, I know, calm down. This is kind of like the new and improved. Besides, you're a counselor, so we think it should do it. Anyway, I said, okay, whatever. This time you only had to run 2 to 3 miles a day, which, trust me, is a lot better than 6 to 8. But we talked these sauna baths. The third day of the sauna, I'm sitting there and all of a sudden I'm hallucinating like crazy. I'm like, oh, no, this is the heat. So I took the newspaper I'm reading, I set it on the bench, I went outside, got a glass of spring water, and for the next 45 minutes, I couldn't move. The hallucinations were so heavy from earlier drugs I had taken.
Wow.
That and almost every drug that I ever remember consuming was coming out of my body. But guess what drug was still coming out of my body after the 26th day?
What was
That's
that?
right, marijuana.
Wow.
And it was very distinct. It was very distinct physical effect. I'd come out, I'd look in the mirror, my eyes would be bloodshot, I'd have that kind of foggy feeling. But at the end of 31 days, the good news is it was kind of like, who turned on the lights? And where have I been for the last, 15 years?
Wow.
Basically, having experienced the before and after, when anyone tries to argue with me about marijuana, I go, okay, listen, here's my challenge. You know how you feel now. Do this sauna detox program. And after that, come and talk to me. Because it was night and day, the difference. Night and day in terms of my speed of thought, my energy level, everything. Anyway, that was a lot for that question, but there you go.
No, you know what? I found that very interesting. So this is the Narcanon program, the purification program.
Yeah, exactly. And, Narcanon's unique. We don't use drugs to get people off of drugs. There's a philosophy in the country today that you substitute one drug with the other, like methadone for heroin, this, that, the other. I'm sorry, I spent 40 years getting people off those drugs, the substitute drugs. So it's an all-natural program, a lot of health, et cetera, et cetera. We first address the physical effects, and then once that's handled, we go after the mental effects, and then the emotional, et cetera, et cetera. So
Makes total sense because I've always looked at it as, and I'm familiar with what you're talking about, that how can you view having someone now on a different drug for the rest of their lifetime as if it's a rehabilitation for real, because they're still taking that into their body. So, I can wholeheartedly agree with you. And that's why this Narcanon program is fantastic, because you actually end off without it being on the drugs. I see you have so many stories. I was going to ask you to share a story on someone who had a problem and the parents may be concerned or whatever, and they rehabilitated, and what happened. Do you have one of those to share?
Yeah, well, very recently, anybody can do the Narcanon program, but very recently I was working at what is the Celebrity Narcanon out in California, and we put it there because it's so hard for anybody who's a VIP or a celebrity to come off drugs without the paparazzi being all over them.
Sure.
So we made this remote location. And some of these people have everything in the world except their life back. And, anyway, we had a girl come in, 27 years old with a 3-year-old son. Wow. And she was the daughter of a multi-billionaire. Family was from Scotland. Mm-hmm. And when she arrived in that center, she'd injected so much heroin that she had no more room on her arms to put the needles. There was just no place to stick a needle. She told me when she entered the rehab that she was now injecting between her toes because that's the only viable skin she had to inject the heroin. She had done something like 11 different programs, had tried everything. The family, like I said, the family had everything except their daughter's life.
Right.
And, we started working with her. A Narcanon withdrawal, there's a withdrawal stage that comes first. We get them in good physical shape. They do a couple of courses, and then they do the sauna detox program. Well, the normal length of time for the withdrawal stage is 3 to 3.5 days.
Mm-hmm.
We worked with this girl 24/7. 9.5 days later, she was physically in good enough shape so that we could start her on, the sauna regimen, starting to get exercise, etc. I mean, it was unbelievable. Well, she finished the program. She finished the entire Narcanon program, and today, that 3-year-old boy, I see him occasionally, who's now like 6 years old, and he's not in the hands of family services. He's with his mom, and she's doing great. Those are the kind of like life-changing wins I see, and it's a common sense approach. It's not complex. It's a very common sense approach to handling the addiction.
You know what? That's exactly my feelings. Is you can have all these material gains and perks, but what is it all worth if your family, your child, or someone else, your spouse, has this problem, and it's so much destruction. I had someone here in the area that had a child who was on rehab, but he wasn't Narcanon. It was some other kind of rehab, and they thought he was fine. They left him at home, and when they came back, they couldn't find him. And at first, they weren't nervous, and they started getting nervous when the night went by, and it's a horrible story, but eventually he ended up drowning himself. And, he was not rehabbed. He was on some other drug substitute, and he never really got over it. So it's horrific. I was going to ask you a question because with what you do, and what's your feeling on all this legalization? I mean, obviously, I know your answer, but behind the legalization, how can people actually be legalizing marijuana with all these problems that it's actually causing?
Well, once again, Ben, it becomes the talking point, doesn't it? It becomes the talking point among families, and then the kids, and we've got this controversy about legalization, and all the while that all that's going on, it's being advertised. You don't think of it in its purest advertising sense, but it is being advertised. Because now people will have discussions on it, et cetera, et cetera. It's, the legalization, I will say this. At very least, it sends a horrible message to our kids.
Right.
It just sends a horrible message to the youth of this country. They are under assault right now. They are absolutely under assault. And, anybody that thinks that, using drugs on a recreational level does not affect them, whoa, think again. Think again. I did it myself for, recreationally for 11 years. And wow. I can tell you the first thing to go is your relationships. That's the first thing to go. If you have a girlfriend or a spouse, a wife, that's the first thing to go. That's the first casualty. The second casualty now starts becoming your health. And it erodes little by little. You develop other things that are like, well, normal, people get that stuff all the time, blah, blah, blah. But the drugs set the person up for it. So they can't see it. They can't see they actually can't see the destruction that's happening to them.
Right.
So yeah, in terms of the legalization itself, sends a horrible message, but at least shut up about it, because that's the message goes out then in a big way.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? We're running to the end of this show, and definitely we're going to have to continue with another episode, and because we have so much more to cover on all kinds of different drugs that are plaguing the country right now. So first of all, I want to thank you for being on the show, Bobby.
Oh, you're very, very welcome, Ben, and I hope this helped some people. It's not the type of information that I give. I'm not doing it from this level here. I've been on the ground with addicts for 40 years, and believe me, I think I've seen it all. Probably not, but I think I have.
I think you've probably seen a heck of a lot more. You're a very modest and humble guy. Thank you for being on the show. And for those of you watching, I asked you a simple question. What would you rather have? A tremendous gain in the stock market and all your landscaping done, or your children happy, healthy, and achieving their goals? And obviously I know the answer. And some of you out there say, well, I want them all, Dr. Fialkoff. I want that and my kids healthy. And that's true. So let's educate. Let's find out the real story, as Mr. Wiggins has said. And let's have a healthy America for our kids to grow up in. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And for now, we'll sign off and see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth show. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet